Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back. We have a special guest today. I'll let him introduce himself in a second. But before we get there, please like, subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you don't like what I have to say, then just go ahead and subscribe and hate watch. But with that, I'll go ahead and let Joe introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Palmetto, Joe the lawyer. You can see my Twitter right there. I got a couple of channels on YouTube. I got the Common Sense Academy, where I cover and break down sovereign citizens and First Amendment auditors. I also got a channel called Joe the Lawyer, where I cover legal news, and I'm starting a new channel. This is the one I'd like everybody to check out. It's called Tips from a Lawyer, where I just give legal information, such as tips for people going through family law, custody issues, facing criminal charges, etc. Anyway, I love Bill's channel, and we're like-minded on a lot of things, so we're here to talk today.
Okay, thanks, Joe. And I'll go ahead and let's go ahead and go into something else while we're starting this. You do it on your channel, but I was set up for it so we can do it. If you want to go ahead and do the same time.
All right, let's do it. All right, everybody. We tend to eat alone and drink alone a lot of the times, but when you eat with someone or when you drink with someone, it tastes better. So whatever cup, glass, drink that you have today, I'm a little, let's see if you can see it, little uninventive today. I got a bottle of water, and that's because I haven't been shopping. So raise your cup, your glass in the air with me. Sip with me. It tastes better when we sip together. Cheers.
And I'm on the old standby, which is coffee. So
I'd be drinking. It's 9 o'clock. If I drink a coffee now, I'd be up till 3.
Yeah, I'm an hour behind you, so I still got a little bit of time.
All right. Fair enough.
All right. And Joe's channels, especially the Sovereign Common Sense Academy, is really, if you want to just be entertained and learn about a facet of society that you're not probably have never been around, check out Common Sense Academy. And as far as Joe the Lawyer, he just did a couple of really great videos on the Chauvin sentencing and on the increase in crime rates around the country and some of the stuff that's been happening with that, which is kind of what we're going to go into now, because I'm a real big advocate, and people know that are on my channel and watch my videos on criminal justice reform. And he's called the Joe the Lawyer for a reason. He is a practicing defense attorney in the state of Pennsylvania. So,
absolutely.
Now, what I find funny is you have Democrats. There's a Democrat administration in right now, which is normally criminal justice reform, this, that, and the other. But we have somebody who once called themselves a top cop in California, and the author of several criminal justice bills that have led to the incarceration of more people of color than anything else since slavery. So now, almost 7 months in, and we've seen nothing towards criminal justice reform at all. Nothing to repeal mandatory minimums. Do you think anything's going to happen with that in this administration?
You know, that's a good point, Bill, and I didn't really think about it from that perspective. You're right. Kamala Harris, former Attorney General, Joe Biden, who that federal crime bill in the 1990s. Are they going to get something done? I don't know. To be honest, here's the thing, and everybody glosses this over, and, the country's been through a lot the last 2 years, but Donald Trump and the Republicans passed a criminal justice reform bill. The First Step Act. And then I think they even passed a bill, like a limited bill, shortly after the death of George Floyd. So I don't even know. I'm not sure what I think there's a lot left to be done, but I don't know what that is. They haven't talked about it at all. That's a good point.
No, it really surprised me. And I know the state of Missouri, there's a famous saying, come here on vacation and leave on probation. And I'm not sure about Pennsylvania, but a lot of what you see, and I saw this working in a prison, you talk to these offenders, because I work segregation, so you kind of hear some of their stories because they had nobody else to talk to.
Yeah.
So they got busted at 17 or 18 in the school zone with weed, end up on probation. They get caught with weed a couple more times, or maybe a DUI, just stupid things kids do when they're 17, 18, 19. Yep. The next thing you know, they're stuck doing 5 years, and they've got 3 felony convictions by the time it's all done, and they're not even 25 yet, instead of effective diversion programs.
I'm with you 100%, Bill. I had a client fairly recently who had really what I would call like a strange or a lopsided sentence. Okay. He did it. It was a fairly serious crime. It was like a burglary or something along those lines, but he did like 2 or 3 years in state prison. Okay. And then the judge, and granted, this was a while ago. This was in the early 2000s, maybe the late 90s. The judge gave him a minimum of like 3 years in state prison and then a 20-year tail. Okay.
Holy crap.
He's been on probation for like 20 years. Okay. And he got into a minor traffic thing, okay, driving on a suspended license. And he comes to me, and he hasn't been in trouble in 20 years, okay? But he's had to go deal with the criminal justice system for 20 years. Now he's scared out of his mind that he's going to get a parole violation for something that he did when he was a teenager. So
that's crazy.
Yeah. And I'll tell you something else, an interesting thing about with criminal justice and probation reform. I think I'm not saying probation should be taken away because it's a tool, right? It's a tool in a toolkit that can sometimes be used effectively. But crap, I can't even remember what I was going to say in regards to probation. But probation, okay, they will, like that guy, okay, they might run like 5 years probation, okay, or 2 years probation. I totally forgot my thought. I'm going to go to something else. But it's very easy to be on probation, okay, and end up in jail, like you said, because you go on probation for a bag of weed, okay, and then you have a technical violation like forgetting to report, okay, and they throw your ass in jail because you're going to sit there for 30 days just until you get to a hearing. So probation, I don't know if I remember my point now. I'm not saying probation should necessarily go away because it's a tool in a toolkit, but I do think that we should look towards either, like you said, diversionary programs, okay, or sentences or a sentencing scheme that doesn't require month-long and year-long supervision for somebody getting caught with a bag of weed, or even if it's a small amount of a harder drug, right? Do you really need to supervise this person for a year? Because it can jam up their life in so many ways.
Yeah. And I mean, it's like you said, the technical violations, you talk to some guys that get, because on the weekends, if they get brought into, because I was at a reception and diagnostic prison, so we would get parole violators in on the weekends, and they'd send them straight to segregation until Monday morning they figured out what to do with them. Yep. And you talk to them, and it's, I missed one too many meetings, or I moved and the PO came to check on me and I wasn't there because I moved. And then they're in there for a week or two, and then they get released again on parole. It's, in my experience, I was a juvenile when I was on probation, and no, I really didn't learn the first couple times. I did the last time. And I was on parole. They had to lift it so I could go in the Army. But I've seen more issues with people on parole or anything else, and guys in prison that are just like, no, I'm not even going to, I don't even want parole. I got 2 years left. I'm just going to do my time and walk free.
Yep. And I almost think that would be better in a lot of cases. Look, I have clients come to me with DUIs or things like this. They might have multiple offense DUIs. And they'll say to me, like, I'll tell them, I'll be like, look, they're going to want 2 years probation. And they'll look at me and be like, Joe, can I just do 30 days in jail or 60 days in jail or 90 days in jail? They don't want to be on that probation for 2 years. They go out, smoke a joint or get drunk. You know what I mean? They end up violating or missing a meeting, okay, or missing a report, and then they get thrown back in jail, and then the probation gets extended again and again. And let's not forget the taxpayer dollars, okay? And maybe that's ultimately what this is about, Bill, at least in part, is the government wanting money, justifying the
well, I will tell you, in the state of Missouri, the largest department in the state is corrections.
I believe it.
They have more employees than any other department in the state.
That's probably true.
I worked in it, so
yeah.
Here's the bad part too. In the training academy where they train all new probation and parole officers and corrections officers, they really do have a great crew in the academy training. They are dedicated, they're experienced. It's just what you get as corrections officers is part of the problem too, because you end up being, if you do your job right and you're there for the safety of the offender as well as your fellow officers, you kind of do have to have a background in psychology to understand where some of these offenders are coming from. Because sometimes that's all it takes to de-escalate somebody is to talk.
I agree.
They got bad news. They're stuck in a cell.
Yeah.
They just need somebody to talk to, somebody to vent to. So yeah, they call you some bad words and come back 10 minutes later. What's really going on?
Yeah.
And they'll lay it out for you and they're calm and you don't have a single issue with them after that. But then you hear their stories and it's some of it. One in particular that I remember because we had a use of force on him. And on the video, it looked like he turned around and tried to spit on one of my officers. He didn't. And when I got a phone call about that, I'm like, no, he didn't try to spit. That was just, I know what the video showed, but that's not, he was turning around yelling. He wasn't trying to spit on him because that's an additional charge.
Sure.
And it could be an assault charge and they go back to state court.
Yeah.
So I went and talked to him, read him the violation later that evening. He was fine with it. We did right by him. I mean, he did what he did. He got in trouble for it. We didn't try to add anything to it. Well, about a month later, he was still in segregation because he was he was always getting in trouble for something. But I was talking to him and he just wanted to get out and go home. And what he wanted to do with his life was just get his disability straight and buy broken bicycles or find broken bicycles, fix them up and donate them to kids. The problem was his wife was still a meth head.
Oh, man.
So he's going to end up going back. He's going to try to look out for his wife. And he's my age, so he's late 40s.
Mm-hmm.
And he's probably going to finish out his life in the system because there are no programs for people like that.
The tough thing about that is you almost got to tell him, like, you got to leave your wife, man. You know, if you're not, like, if she's dragging you down, you got to leave her. And I think too, to that point, like the probation officers being psychologists I agree with that 100%. Listen, I wish somebody gave me that training before I became an attorney. Okay.
It probably would have helped a lot.
Yeah, at least a class, like one class or something. I never really took psychology. I've read on my own, but I never even took it in undergrad. But I think too, like a big thing, and maybe this goes, I was making an issue about funding. Well, maybe there's not enough. I don't know. But I think too, a lot of what I see with probation violators for technical violations, and look, this is mostly coming from the violator. Okay. So sometimes they may be blowing smoke up my, I don't know. All right. But there's a lack of communication. Because a lot of times they come to me or they end up in jail and they say to me, I didn't know, Joe. I didn't know I was supposed to report. And, that's one of the things that I've observed about probation is when the person's on probation, like it's almost like it's all on that individual, and I think part of that is because the way the criminal justice sees it is you got probation, you got a break. Right? We could have put you in jail for 6 months. We could have put you in jail for 9 months. So this is a break for you, but you have to be proactive. You have to make sure. So everything goes on the offender. And some of those people they don't have support systems. They don't have jobs. They don't have a lot of money. And so they're not easily able to organize their lives to make sure that they're complying with everything when it comes to probation. And I would say probably about 50% of them are blowing smoke up my, but there's a percentage of them that I think genuinely end up violating probation really just because, like, I don't want to say through no fault of their own, but more like just negligence or just not making some phone calls that they should have made. Like I'll give you an example. I had a guy who was, who had crimes, was facing cases in 2 different counties. Okay. And the one county, he went to court like in December, all right? And he was put on probation in that county. And then he went to court in another county in January for actually 2 cases, and he was put on probation in that county. And the subsequent one was the county where he lived. Well, he made a couple phone calls with probation in the other county, and he thought that it was transferred to his new county. Okay. But in this county where he's on probation, okay, he was doing really well. He was actually in a treatment court and had perfect attendance. And then out of nowhere, boom, they issued a warrant, picked him up and put him in jail. And the reason was he was supposed to go into that other county and sign some papers to complete the transfer, and he never did it. He just lost track of it in his mind. And it wasn't like he did it on purpose. And probation called him once or twice. I don't know if they did anything beyond that, but he just lost track in his mind. So boom, they issued a warrant, like boom, go get him. And he was in this other program doing fantastic. And then he ends up sitting in jail for 30 days. And I don't think this particular person had a job, but for people who have jobs, boom, there goes your job.
Oh, yeah. And there goes your income.
Absolutely.
And I will tell you, the treatment courts, because I worked with, when I was in workforce development, I did deal with people that were in drug court, DUI court, and helped start the homeless court in Springfield, Missouri.
Awesome.
And one of the issues I saw in homeless court was there were certain criteria you had to meet. You couldn't have a violent background, couldn't have any predatory offenses. But we had a couple of people that were facing charges, like you said, in a couple different counties. And there was only one issue. Every other county was willing to give up jurisdiction because they're like, hey, that's one less headache for us. This is something minor. Do you want to take them? Go ahead and take them. Except for one county, and I will call them out, and I'll tell you why. It was Christian County.
Okay.
And Christian County has got to be probably one of the most corrupt counties I have ever seen. They would not give up somebody that had pending cases or was on probation. Okay. But they're the same county that had more than one member of the sheriff's department indicted.
Oof.
To include the sheriff. Oof. For stealing material and money. And it's also where I learned in the state of Missouri, if the sheriff gets fired for any reason, the county coroner takes over as the chief law enforcement official for the county.
Really?
Which I thought was a kind of weird thing.
It's kind of weird, but also kind of cool.
Yeah, but and then dealing with drug courts, every drug court I've seen, they're pretty strict. If somebody's doing well in drug court, the set of rules they're following is usually very, I'd even call it draconian sometimes.
Yeah.
So when people do complete those programs, actually, I'm going to look up the actual success rate of that because I've never actually looked it up before, but I'm willing to bet it's fairly high. I bet because of what they go through in those treatment programs.
Yeah, and I've found that to be true here in Pennsylvania and the counties that I'm in. They can be pretty tough. But if you make it through, I think you're right. Like if somebody makes it through, their success or their recidivism rate probably really goes down.
Well, I know a friend of mine's son had a lot of issues for years and years. And then when he finally ended up in drug court, he actually managed to get his life back on track. He went to school, had a job. He completed the program, and he's been doing well since then.
I believe it, man. I believe it. I was involved in the Veterans Court here in Allegheny County, and it was really cool because, the offenders were all there, but there was a group of probably 10 vets, all different ages, guys from like Vietnam era, maybe even some from even older than that. A lot of them guys are passed away. This was like 10 years ago, but every sort of, different generations in the military. And there were about 5 to 10 of them at every single court appearance. And they provided support to all the offenders who were in there. And, there were always like a couple of attorneys and then obviously the judge, his staff, and then probation. And I thought like watching those graduations is actually amazing because a lot of the offenders, they've reached points in their lives that they've never reached before. They're really proud of themselves. They're graduating, they've stayed clean, stayed out of trouble for a year, 6 months. They get very emotional. I mean, it's a great thing to see. I'm a big advocate of those programs.
Well, no, and I can understand it because I've never ended up in a position where I had to be involved with that as a defendant. What I have is I've gone through my life, especially after I left the Army, I've self-sabotaged just in the last few years a few times, just because for a lot of reasons.
For sure.
And I'm finally at a point where I'm physically, I still got a few pounds left to go, but mentally and emotionally, I'm in a better place than I have been for a long time. And honestly, part of that is the catharsis of YouTube, being able to put stuff out there and talk about stuff and be called everything from a right-wing white nationalist to a liberal bleep. And I just think it's funny because the same people that do that, like we go back to, they must be selectively watching my videos, because I've pretty much gone after both sides at some point in the last year.
Sure. I can relate. I know I wouldn't say, I would say it is cathartic for me, maybe to a little bit of a lesser extent, but I feel really good. Like after I make a video and I put it out there, like early on, I used to be like nervous, and now I feel like it's like an outlet for me, and especially like if you have things like clanking around in your brain and having the ability to share it with the world, is really cool. I don't tend to get that personal in my videos. I probably should more. I've had people ask me a lot of stuff like that. I do a little bit when I do the live streams. But I feel you. Bill. And, I think you look pretty good. What, you got a couple more pounds? You got a goal for weight loss?
Yeah, I do. I actually do, because I picked up a lot of weight actually when I was working in corrections.
Okay.
And just to the point of, I know where my healthy weight is and where I feel good, and I'm just trying to get back down to that.
I gotcha. I mean,
I'm coming up on 50, so I'd like to. In fact, I don't know if you've ever seen Alan Roberts' videos, but he's a fitness guy. He's a Marine. He's a Marine veteran.
Okay.
But on his, it's something he said, I want to be in good enough shape to dance with my grandchildren at their wedding. Amen. And that made a lot of sense to me. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah.
Hell yeah.
But now there is something you had when you were talking about your video about rising crime rates that I found interesting.
Sure.
Because I didn't notice it until after you said it, was they went away from just talking about shootings. Like this past weekend in Chicago, which is the closest not so great city to me, 27 people shot over the weekend. And now they're referring to them as mass shootings as opposed to just shootings. You brought that up in your video, and I found it interesting because to me, that's almost let's change terminology to match up with the anti-gun legislation we want to say.
100%.
I'm more political in my videos than you are, so
yeah,
I'm dragging you into this discussion.
That's okay. That's all right. I don't mind. I thought a little bit about, I wasn't sure if I should put that out there, but I did. So yeah, I noticed it. I'll tell you when I kind of noticed it. So in Pittsburgh, a couple of years ago, there was a shooting. It was sort of like a gangland massacre. I don't know what else to call it. Okay. Where a bunch of people were having a backyard barbecue, and we're talking women, children, and, grown men. Yeah. And the target, I believe I don't remember all the details. You could find it if you Googled Pittsburgh enough. But the target was like somebody who had like snitched on somebody else. Okay. So one or maybe two guys went and they targeted this backyard, and I think they just used handguns. I can't remember. Anyway, they just shot up this backyard, and they hit like 5 or 6 people, and there were like 3 or 4 deaths. And prior, right? Like if we go back to Columbine, it was always, a mass shooting was something like Columbine, something like the Las Vegas shooter, where it's like one person shooting with no particular purpose except to cause death and terror, right? That was like a mass shooting. And what I've seen, especially in the past year, and I believe that the media has started to do this, okay, is they started to label like gangland shootings where one or more person is shot as mass shootings. And like you said, it's I think they're trying to lump in, a lot of or shooting violence that frankly this country has been living with for decades. Okay, they're trying to lump that into mass shootings, like call them, the school shootings, etc. And I agree with you. I think that the reason for that is to probably get people, to create, a movement for ultimately for gun control or action on it. Because it was just that type of shooting was never labeled that way before, ever. It was never labeled that way.
I think it also can be a way to divert from the reasons that the actual crime rates are going up on top of it, because a lot of these cities are being run by, Chicago's run by Democrats.
Yes.
Minneapolis, for all the violence that's going on there, LA, San Francisco. And the thing is, because I'm a little bit older than you, so I remember the crack epidemic in the 80s, which led to the crime bill.
Yeah.
But it was bad. Drive-bys and everything else, and we're heading that same direction. And at the same time, they're talking about defunding the police and reducing the number of officers. And
I know, man.
I want to see the social worker that's going to deal with the armed suspect at 3 o'clock in the morning that just committed a carjacking. Because if I was a social worker, I know what my answer would be. And I'll say that as somebody who actually thought about going into social work, believe it or not, after being in workforce and corrections. I had given it some thought.
Sure.
Because it's where you can do some good, but by the same token, it's very people-y, and I like to limit my exposure to most people.
Yeah, social workers, very, very, very people-y.
No, and this is not knocking the profession. So if you're a social worker or you know one, I think they do great work. I think they are far overworked and underpaid for what they do. And I think they deserve more credit for their wins.
I agree. And working in my job, I see a lot of people who are social workers or quasi-social workers. And, talking about a support system, they can step in and be a support system for somebody who doesn't have that, and just like a lot of my clients, they just don't have the life skills for whatever reason sometimes to deal with certain issues like keeping appointments and things like that. And a social worker can help just in that aspect. So I agree with that 100%. But yeah, it's interesting what you said about them, relabeling the shootings and sort of, what did you say about like deflecting blame from Democratic?
These rising crime rates in these major cities that are being run by Democrats.
Yeah.
Because name one of these cities, and I don't know about Pittsburgh or Philadelphia in particular, but I know the majority of these cities, when you read these stats, are being run by Democratic mayors.
Yeah, that's true. So Pittsburgh's had Democratic mayors forever.
Well, that explains the Steelers, but
what's up?
No, we're going to end on that note, by the way. We're going to talk about football since we're coming up on preseason.
All right, I'm cool. I'll do that for sure, Bill. But yeah, Pittsburgh's always had Democrats running it basically since the 1940s. But yeah, to deflect away from rising crime rates, or just to, I guess, maybe by relabeling it, yeah, they're trying to control the narrative, because I think there's a debate out there about why crime is rising, right? And what you see is, Democrats are saying guns, guns, guns. There's too many guns. There's too many guns. I read articles that said that, well, people bought a bunch of guns during the pandemic, and that's why we have more crime, because people bought more guns. right? And that's the narrative that the Democrats are pushing for the rising crime. They're basically saying it's the pandemic plus guns. And I think you hear Republicans saying, that it's defund the police and the anti-police, fervor that has taken the nation. Frankly, it's probably all of those things to some degree or another.
I would have to agree, because I know the majority of research I've read says that legal weapons really aren't involved in a whole lot of this crime.
Right.
But because there's more guns available, houses are broken into, guns are stolen, guns are left in cars are broken into, guns are stolen.
Yeah.
So there's more guns available that end up in the illegal realm, which allows more shooting. I guess there is some validity to that it is a combination of all of them. I hadn't really thought about it that way.
I would say a little bit, but it seems to me like the remedy, though, I don't know. We had crime rates dropping in this country for 20 some years since the 1990s. Right. And, I talked about broken windows. There's a lot of people that dispute that theory. There's a really great book. Hang on a second.
Actually, the point you brought up about broken windows.
Yeah.
Is broken windows can't be failing if we're not doing it. I think it's a huge point that nobody's talking about.
Yeah.
If we've gotten away from using it, that doesn't mean the theory failed.
Yeah.
It means we're trying theories that don't work. Let's go back to the one that we know does work.
Yes. I agree. And there's just, I think there's work to be done in many different areas in order for this country to end up in a better place. And, there are things in the criminal justice system that need reformed. There are issues with policing. Absolutely. I mean, we need better police in this country. But what I don't think we need to be doing is not enforcing the laws or just forgetting about charging people with crimes. I don't think that's the answer.
Yeah, I think that's a crazy answer. And when justice starts to rely upon, well, wait a minute, but you were part of a protest for President Trump as opposed to a protest for Antifa.
Yeah.
So we're going to charge you, but we're not going to charge the person that tried to barricade the federal building and set it on fire with people inside.
Yes. Just right. That's the whole reason. What is it? Lady Justice. Whereas, justice is supposed to be blind.
Well, and we talked about it. I did not go to law school, but I love the law. I mean, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I think, even though a lot of her decisions I do not agree with, prime example, burning the flag, because she voted, or she found that it was protected by the First Amendment, and then she wrote an editorial talking about how she found it horrible, but from the standpoint of justice, it was covered with the First Amendment. And I love attorneys, especially Supreme Court justices, that will come out and say that. My personal belief is this: here's what the Constitution says, so here's how I have to find on these cases. So I love the law. I truly do. I think there's a lot of people in charge right now that are, I don't know what they're trying to do to it, but I got to believe in the end, Lady Justice will prevail.
I think so. I think so, Bill, and I hope so at least. And I do, one thing I like about, I'm a lawyer, so obviously I'm probably biased to a certain degree, but we have, 3 branches of government, right? We have the president, we have the Congress, and we have the Supreme Court. And, one of the sayings is, well, the Supreme Court is really the only branch made up of adults. And I kind of like the role, it's nice having one branch where they're not elected. They don't have to play politics. They're not, unfortunately, politicians have made the Supreme Court political more than it should be in recent years. But they're supposed to sit on there and read the laws. And some people say, oh, term limits or get them out, this or that. Maybe an age limit isn't a bad idea. but they have to be protected in their position so that they can't be influenced on their decision, right? That's the reason a Supreme Court justice sits there for their whole life, because only if you're sitting in that chair knowing that nobody can remove you can you make an unpopular decision that you believe is the right decision. Whereas presidents in Congress are incentivized to do the opposite. They're just incentivized to do what's popular. They're not incentivized to do what's right. Almost never.
No, I'd 100% agree with you. And I'll tell you now, even the justices seated now, I think at any given point since they've been appointed, the president that appointed them has looked at them and went, that's exactly what I didn't want you to do.
Yes.
I am willing to bet, and that's every single justice we have there now, has disagreed with the president that appointed them.
Absolutely.
And I think that is so cool because that shows right there. It's not, yes, they try to politicize it, but they are still independent thinkers. They are the court of last resort. They are still to this day what they were envisioned by our founding fathers to be. And that's the ultimate arbitrator of the Constitution.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we got to keep it that way. And, you know, we're going to put a couple more justices on, you know, the Democrats were talking about this or that. I just think I think that's dangerous talk, frankly, because it can just remove the Supreme Court has already been damaged by politics in recent years, and that would just damage its credibility further and further and further. And we need at least one branch that is respected, legitimately above reproach to a certain degree. And that has been the Supreme Court, right? I mean, everybody said, Bush v. Gore, people had differences of opinion, but when the Supreme Court, settled the case, made their decision, the country accepted it, we move forward. That's the role that they need to play. Like, they are in that unique position to sort of put out fires in ways that Congress and or the president just cannot do because they're inherently political creatures.
No, I think you're 100% correct. And I think they've proven decade after decade that in the end, they're there to support the Constitution.
Amen.
And regardless of who appointed them, they're going to follow what in their heart they believe the Constitution stands for. Now, on that note, we're going to go ahead and close this out. But before we close it out, okay, we're coming up on preseason, and I'm willing to bet because of where you're from, what is the ultimate Super Bowl? What two teams?
The ultimate Super Bowl, man. Woo, that's a tough one. I'll tell you what. Well, not
that's been played, but ultimately to true fans, because you'll relate to this. Because I'll tell you what and I've seen it in my lifetime, and I'd be happy to see it every single season. But
okay, who's that?
It's the Cowboys and the Steelers.
I'm with you.
It's almost at a point where I don't even care who wins. But they're the ultimate rivalry in football in my mind because of how I grew up. Watching Starbuck and Terry Bradshaw.
Sure. I'll say one thing about they are maybe the two teams with the most dedicated and loyal following.
And haters.
Yes, and haters. Lovers and haters.
Yep.
So I would love to see that too. I think the Steelers versus the Eagles would be cool, okay? Because it'd be like it almost have.
That would be, you know what? I would actually be okay with that too, just because they're both right there.
Yeah. I like the classic teams, right? Like the Cowboys, the Steelers, the Packers.
Okay, so you're in the same boat as me. You have, when the NFL expanded, it's still I remember way back when it was just this many teams, and it seemed it was a simpler time.
Yeah, I've just read NFL history, and I think it's cool the teams that have that deep history, right? Like even Browns, as much as I don't like them, they had like this great history in the 50s. So those teams generally, when the Steelers played the Seahawks in the Super Bowl, look, I loved it because they won, but the matchup didn't, make my mouth water. It was like, oh.
Well, and you brought up the Browns, and I grew up in Louisiana, so I was never a Saints fan. I grew up because of my grandfather's a Cowboys fan.
Okay, yeah.
But the Saints, the Browns, the Packers, when they're not doing well,
yeah,
these teams have the strongest fan base that you could ever imagine.
Heck yeah.
And I think that's awesome in football, period. And it goes back to loyalties. And I've been a Cowboys fan my whole life. That's never going to change.
Right.
I'm willing to bet you've been a Steelers fan your whole life.
My whole life, Bill. Absolutely. What do you think you think the Cowboys are going to be good this year or what?
I do. I think Dak is back. I think he'll be healthy.
Yeah.
I think wide receivers are scary at this point.
Who do they Michael Gallup?
They got Gallup. They got Cooper.
Right.
Amari Cooper.
Right, yeah.
Who everybody was questioning that trade. But I'll tell you now, Amari Cooper goes back to like the 80s and early 90s Cowboys, watching those guys play.
Sure. Yeah, Cooper's the real deal. He's one of the
and I'll tell you now, the Steelers, if I'm not watching the Cowboys, I want to watch a game. I can't watch the Eagles because they're part of the NFC East. It just doesn't work for me.
I got you.
I want to watch the Steelers play, and I love like Villanueva because of his background and everything else. I mean, it's kind of cool to see.
Yeah. He's gone. He's not a Steeler anymore.
Where'd he go?
The Ravens.
He went to the Ravens?
Yeah.
Well, you know what I will say, though? The Ravens have a history of picking up players who teams were ready to get rid of.
Yeah.
And they're good for another 5 years and multi-millions of dollars. So good for him.
Yeah. He wasn't as good last year, but the Steelers' style of play was a little different. That's kind of what he said when he went to Baltimore. He was like, so he might have a resurgence because they're a run-based team, and the Steelers weren't last year to their detriment. But they took Najee Harris, number one running back. So hopefully they're going to get back to it. Who'd the Cowboys draft, Bill?
They got a couple of linebackers.
Okay.
A cornerback, which I'm really curious about because Jalen Smith and Leighton Vander Esch were starting to click at the end of the season. I just don't think they got there fast enough to make the head coach happy. So we'll see what happens because they haven't let anybody go.
Gotcha.
Their core defense is still the same, and they've added to it.
Yeah.
I think their big thing starting next year is going to be rebuilding that offensive line because they've been famous for that forever.
Sure. For sure. I mean, with skill players, Dallas is as good as anybody in the league.
Oh, yeah. And I think Dak coming back, I just find it funny that there were Cowboys fans complaining about him holding out for the contract and this and that. I'm like, for 4 years, he was the lowest paid starting quarterback in the NFL. He was a fourth-round draft pick.
Yeah.
So he was by far the lowest paid quarterback in the NFL. And he's the only one out of his draft class that's still a starting quarterback. So you know what? That's fine. You grew up in a trailer park in Louisiana and you always want to be a Cowboy? Yeah, make him pay you.
Oh, I didn't know he's from Louisiana.
Yeah, he was. He grew up as a Cowboys fan. Okay. So, yeah, but there may be some relatable stuff in there too.
Sure. I mean, Dak, he was putting up like video game numbers before he got hurt.
It was crazy. I know because he was on my fantasy team when he got hurt.
Yeah. I had him the year before, and I got him a little late in the draft, and he was great for me. I mean, I agree. If Dak stays healthy, Cowboys are in the mix, and they're almost certainly a playoff team. I don't know who even won that division that division was terrible last year.
It was.
Washington with a losing record, right?
I think so, actually. Yeah. I think it was losing record versus losing record to make it.
They were 8-8 or something. Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and end this. What I will say is, and I'm going to put Joe can let me know now or later. It's up to him. I would say if we get at least 6,000 views on this when I get it reposted, we start doing this once every couple of weeks. Sounds good. Let's do it, Bill. Absolutely. All right. So there you have it. For my subscribers, go to Joe's channel, subscribe to him and watch him. They're pretty, I'm telling you now, if you just need to, you want to laugh at something, go to the Common Sense Academy. It is great. Not just the videos, but his assessment of them. the Joe the Lawyer, you get some really good, thorough, in-depth breakdowns of what's going on from the standpoint of an attorney, which is a great thing. And then once your new channel is up and going, so subscribe to his channels. Once again, subscribe to mine, like, let me know what you think in the comments. If you dislike, and I'll say this on my channels or Joe's channels, go ahead and subscribe and hate watch us. It still helps the algorithm.
Heck yeah.
And with that, everybody have a good evening. I'll see you guys later.
All right, everybody.